If I may go off script for a moment, I personally want to convey what an honor it is to be able to introduce both our guest, Jon Gallagher, and our podcast host, Jon Uhler. As rare is the time you'll find two such men together for such a discussion. Two men who each have lived lives of such integrity that they were ready to do the right thing, the godly thing, when confronted with moral dilemmas in their careers, which meant they would each open themselves up to tremendous personal and professional consequences by very large organizational structures and powers, when others around them would have likely found an excuse to simply turn a blind eye to what they each respectively witnessed, finding plausible justification to not risk getting involved. In Jon Gallagher's case, as we are hearing from him, he would not just go along with what his employer expected, with what had been the policy and practice of the Roman Catholic Church, of dealing with pedophile priests by allowing church hierarchy to fly the perpetrator out of the country prior to law enforcement being able to make an arrest. Hence, Jon Gallagher is the first priest on record, having served for 25 years, to have prevented the escape of a pedophile priest. In Jon Uhler's case, it is not all that well known he was the very first prison psychology staff within the US state prison system to take a bold and risky stand against an entire state prison system, having blown the whistle on the abuse of mental health inmates in long-term solitary confinement, having designed and overseen clinical treatment within the very first intensive treatment program for such men in long-term solitary confinement in the United States, which is also how he ended up logging more clinical contact hours in long-term solitary that any single prison psych staff in the US or Canada spending over 5 straight years in that uniquely intensive environment. Jon Uhler saw how a change of prison administrations was facilitating an influx of uniquely sadistic corrections officers into that treatment milieu, which caused a very dangerous change of unit dynamics, leading to what one could almost describe as a repeat of the infamous Stanford prison experiment, which generated the book The Lucifer Effect, Understanding How Good People Turn Evil.
One of America's most prestigious academic institutions, and in 1971, the scene of one of the most notorious experiments in the history of psychology.
This particular experiment was planned for 2 weeks, but terminated after just 6 days.
The guards had become dangerously sadistic. The guards were going far beyond keeping the prisoners behind bars, and the prisoners were breaking down emotionally.
I can't say that. I'm f***ed up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all f***ed up inside. Help me out! Help me out!
With the chief prison psychologist and other key prison administrators refusing to help Jon rein in the rogue officers, he was left with one of two options: either look the other way and maintain his secure position, or elect to do the right thing, the hard thing, to do whatever he could to stop such abuse, even if it meant going outside of the system to a federal advocacy organization, the Disability Rights Network, which would ultimately lead to the United States Department of Justice launching an extended undercover investigation where Jon and 2 of his colleagues, who agreed to join him in the whistleblowing investigation, served as the 3 key witnesses against the prison administration and their immediate boss, prison chief psychologist James Harrington. As a result, this case, the practice of using long-term solitary confinement on mental health inmates, was brought to a close throughout prisons, both state and federal, within the United States. Thus, it is important to see in Jon Uhler a man who was willing to do what no previous prison psychology staff member had ever been willing to do, to risk his career, his safety, and his future, by being the first psych staff to stand up to an entire state prison system. And he is forever grateful that his other 2 prison colleagues were willing to bravely stand alongside him, as it would ultimately take such 3 strong voices to prove too much truth for the prison system to refute. To read the actual emails, official notes of thanks, and professional feedback Jon Uhler received during his time while serving with distinction on prison psych staff for over a decade, and about the failed whistleblower.retaliatory attempts taken by the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, including the court order dismissing all fraudulent charges of so-called forgery thrown at Jon Uhler, and ordering the expungement of his record back to the historically spotless condition. Please visit churchprotect.org under the Insights 2 tab. Then under When Called to Do the Hard Thing for the entire story, with all the documents showing the events leading to 100% of all the false charges being dismissed. The pathetic attempt at retaliating against him doing the right thing all fell flat, and that is also why he was able to retire from the prison system on his terms at the time of his choosing, and with his full pension and retirement benefits still intact. As Jon Uhler faced the ridiculous and previously unheard of criminal charges of forgery, something which had never been used against any other psych staff before or since, ever in the history of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, over what would otherwise have been handled as simply an administrative paperwork issue. But they were determined to find something, anything on him, to spin a false narrative about him in order to bury their retaliatory hatchet in his back. Toward that end, they employed multiple administrative and clerical staff to covertly audit his work for the better part of an entire year after Jon's immediate boss retired, looking for any mistakes or errors they might find. From them piling on the work. It was a classic setup. What would have ordinarily been a simple corrective administrative issue, especially given his year's worth of exemplary performance reviews by his boss and chief institutional psychologist, Dr. Robert Yaskanich, which would have ordinarily been easily addressed and corrected simply by lowering Jon's extremely heavy workload. All normal administrative steps were summarily sidestepped and bypassed, given that it was the objective of the administration to strategically increase Jon's workload toward the goal of burying him under ever-increasing time pressure, so that he would begin to make mistakes, to begin to try to make the case that Jon was no longer able to keep up with the job's demands. Given who Jon is, he would not give them what they wanted, his resignation. He would simply try to continue to handle the expanding workload. But it was only a matter of time until he would begin to miss things and make mistakes. And that is when they were able to implement their plans for a behind-the-scenes audit to find any errors. And of course, with that level of intensive scrutiny, they were bound to find something they could use to complete their search and destroy mission. After a year of digging, they finally found what they could use to craft their false narrative about Jon Uhler. Out of all those months and all those thousands of documents, they found 3 single sheets of paper. Get that? They found a total of 3 single sheets of paper, comprising 3 individual monthly inmate treatment plans. Yep, you heard that right. Out of the hundreds of mental health treatment plans and psych reports and evaluations he had constructed over the 11+ years of his tenure, with an administration that had launched a covert intensive audit involving multiple administrative staff, spending countless hours, spanning a year, combing through thousands of Jon's clinical documents and reports, and coming up with only 3 errors, on 3 single sheets of paper, on 3 of the hundreds of monthly inmate treatment plans. And they would take those and attempt to spin criminal charges from that, no matter how absurd and transparently retaliatory it was to do so. Upon finding the 3 separate single sheets of paper out of thousands reviewed, they took the brazen and unprecedented step of lodging actual criminal charges. That's right. So hungry for his scalp were they, that they would sidestep all normal corrective HR steps and all historical union practices and processes, and they went directly for the jugular, asserting Jon Uhler had committed criminal acts of forgery, despite them full well knowing that this was an administratively assigned workload issue and had nothing to do with criminality. But it was their way of teaching him a lesson, of punishing him for daring to blow the whistle on their institutional corruption and to make an example out of him. But their wicked motives and retaliatory scheme was easily seen through by the judge, who rebuked the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections at the beginning of the proceedings for trying to pull off such a malicious stunt, dismissed all charges, and ordered all such spurious charges be expunged from Jon Uhler's record. Though John Gallagher did not face having false criminal charges filed against him, he would not only face the same kind of malicious slandering of his reputation and the strategic and methodical ramping up of personal and professional harassment, but due to lacking any workplace support or union protection, John would face the full backlash of the church's hierarchy's ire, and knowing they held powerful leverage over any retirement he might receive after 25 years of full-time service, John Gallagher did indeed face a rare degree of retaliatory tactics and strategic punishment for his brave and principled stance, and the hierarchy would indeed set their sights upon him. It was their way of teaching him a lesson, of punishing him for daring to blow the whistle on their institutional corruption, and to make an example out of him. The church's leadership drove him to the emotional breaking point by ever-increasing workload and by damaging his reputation with local congregations by means of slandering him. His health failed, which placed him in a very vulnerable position, because as is the nature of employment as a priest within a local Catholic parish, he lived and slept full-time on church grounds, to where it could be made to look like accidents happen, even after he had been admitted into the emergency room at one of the major nearby hospitals. Such retaliatory tactics employed in such special cases as John's would work as the wicked protectors of predators within church leadership intended. They eventually forced his hand, which meant he would leave the ministry after 25 years, without any retirement package or benefits. Talk about paying a heavy price for protecting children, left to try to start over again. With little to show for 2.5 decades of faithful ministry, to try to figure out what he might do to support himself from scratch, to begin a new career in his 50s. He has done that. He has restarted his life and a career, and is also now beginning to tell his story to set the record straight. With the recent selection of a new pope, Jon Gallagher, and survivor groups within the church, representing those who've been abused by priests, report reasons to believe that it will more than likely, unfortunately, still be business as usual within the Catholic Church's leadership. As John says, you'll know them by their fruits.
Well, there are new so-called whistleblower documents that accuse Pope Leo XIV of mishandling abuse allegations while he was bishop in Peru.
WGN's Christine Flores joins us now with those accusations and the steps the group releasing them plans to take as they try to hold the new pope accountable.
Well, good afternoon, Ben and Lourdes. The documents were presented by a group known as the Survivors Network, those abused by priests. They claim the pontiff mishandled clergy's sex abuse cases, which were swept under the rug, and say there is mounting evidence supporting the claims.
This is the underground story of Prevost. This is the side of him and his management and his decisions that we're finally being able to bring to light.
Peter Isley is one of the founders of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, also known as SNAP. The group filed a complaint on March 25th against then Cardinal Prevost with the Vatican Secretary of State, claiming he abused clerical power in the handling of abuse cases.
The reason we filed that complaint, and we filed 6 of them at that time, so it wasn't because of any personal vendetta that we had against Prevost. He held this very important position at the dicastery for bishops, where he was then put in charge of managing the conduct of all of these bishops around the world. It raised alarms for us, and we believe that what we had seen in their open letter reached, a level of proof that we needed to demand an investigation, and that's what we did.
One case is about a then priest in the Archdiocese of Chicago who was placed on restricted ministry in 1990 due to abuse allegations. According to the group, he was not an Augustinian and was allowed to live at an Augustinian friary from 2000 to 2002, which was around the corner from an Archdiocese elementary. The second Chicago case is about a principal at a Catholic high school with reported history of abusing children between 2006 and 2010.
I think these cases show a pattern of inaction, of covering up abuse, of mishandling cases, of not following church policies, and endangering children.
The complaint goes on to mention 3 women in Peru who came forward to accuse 2 priests during Prevost's tenure as cardinal. The group is now calling on the Pope to establish the following.
We're asking for a law written into canon law that makes it a crime to cover up the rape of a child. It's not asking much. There is no crime, there is no law on the books right now that has a punishment for helping to cover up for child rape.
We have reached out to the Archdiocese of Chicago for comment on these cases and have not heard back yet. The group says they have received lots of pushback from the Vatican and cardinals from around the world who have told them multiple times Pope Leo did everything right and handled the cases properly. Back to you guys in the studio.
All right, we'll take it from you, Christine. Thank you.
Simply put, the test of whether the new Pope is a man of integrity, serious about going after sexual predators, or whether it is business as usual, where he simply intends to continue to protect the Church's business interests over protecting women and children from predators and predator rings operating within the Catholic Church, proving he is a false shepherd and a hireling and simply pushing more of the same corrupt church-protecting system. The test comprises 4 very simple and straightforward questions. 1. Will he drag his feet with regard to allowing law enforcement complete access to all of the secret bishop archives containing the names and incidents of predators? 2. Will he continue to drag out making real and full reparations and restitution to all survivors of predator priests, and restitution to those priests who were targeted for dismissal after blowing the whistle on predators within the Church? 3. Will he stop resisting legislation intended to lift statutes of limitations on abuse claims for older survivors? And 4. Will he allow the US FBI, the Department of Justice, and Interpol to gain unfettered access to church records and electronics to root out the current pedophile rings operating within the Catholic clergy? In terms of the subsequent steps he took to hold the Church's hierarchy accountable for whistleblower retaliation, workplace harassment, and other troubling employment practices, as we will see in the final part of the interview, Jon would fight back to hold the Church's leadership accountable for violating employment practices by taking his case all the way to the US Supreme Court, a precedent-setting case. But lest I jump ahead a bit too much in our story, in terms of where we left off, we will hear about what tactics were brought to bear against Jon for daring to defy Church's orders to let the perpetrator priest be flown out of the country at night before police could arrive to arrest him. Hearing their respective stories regarding the retaliation from having done the right thing, it is understandable why both John Uhler and Jon Gallagher have taken strength from the truth of Scripture, of God being a God of justice and being their recompense. When they stood up for what is right and bravely stood against those demonically inspired wicked enemies and the evil schemes that were employed against them because of their godliness. One of the verses both John Uhler and Jon Gallagher point to encourage others about God honoring those who do right, is Psalm 37, verses 30 to 34, which reads as follows: "The godly offer good counsel. They teach right from wrong. They have made God's law their own, so they will never slip from his path. The wicked wait in ambush for the godly, looking for an excuse to kill them. But the Lord will not let the wicked succeed, or let the godly be condemned when they are put on trial. Put your hope in the Lord. Travel steadily along his path. He will honor you by giving you the land. You will see the wicked destroyed." That was from the New Living Translation. You can see why it is such a rare opportunity to hear from such two principled men, and to have them together for an interview. Men who've each paid the price for doing the hard thing. But now, we resume where the interview left off last time, this being part 4 of Jon Gallagher's interview and personal story. We pick up the interview where Jon Gallagher begins describing what happened after the predator priest was arrested and what it was like to face such systematic and professional-grade retaliation at the hands of the world's largest and most powerful religious organization on earth. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and follow to ensure you are notified when additional videos are published.
Welcome back to the Predator Watch podcast. I'm Jon Uhler, and we have as our special guest, Jon Gallagher. Jon, thank you for continuing to be with us. We are picking up where we left off, where you left off, and I recommend that people go back and watch the previous episodes. You blew the whistle on child abuse, on child sexual abuse, and what is so profound about what you did, not only did you do the right thing, but there are a number of priests that have also done the right thing over the past number of years, but your willingness to blow the whistle ultimately produced a conviction. So that is what's so compelling about your case, because the Catholic Church, the hierarchy, trashed your reputation. They went after you. You had a sense that was going to be the case, but the way they did this, right, they don't like sunshine, and we are here to help people understand that though we are not anti-Catholic, we're not trashing the Catholic faith, we are after sunshine. People need to be held accountable for the amount of sexual abuse of, quite frankly, of women as well, but of children that is going on in the Catholic Church. And good folks like you have stood up and said enough is enough. And so you blew the whistle, and you paid a very heavy price for that.